The clash of ideas is the sound of freedom. Lady Bird Johnson, First Lady and wife of President Lyndon B. Johnson. All right. Good morning. Welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. All right, folks, today I'm going to, I put together as best I could some of my thoughts post a debate between Dave Smith and Alex. Probably going to get this wrong. Nowrasteh. I think that's how you say his name. I was so busy preparing that I forgot to prepare his last name. Like listen to it a couple times and maybe say it out loud in practice. So if Alex is listening or any fans of Alex are listening and they're like, "Oh, you started out bad," my apologies. I really don't mean to get people's names wrong. Um, but in fairness to me, Smith is a lot easier. So anyway, Dave and Alex, they debated what the libertarian position ought be. Now, well, okay, so here's what the resolution that was given was government restrictions on the immigration of peaceful and healthy people make sense from a libertarian standpoint, especially in present day America. So that was the resolution. Dave took the affirmative, Alex took the negative. Okay. And so I watched the debate. The debate itself was roughly about an hour and a half. Now, what I'm not going to do, because I pulled a bunch of clips, what I'm not going to do is try to tackle like every single point. Basically, I just want to present some thoughts from both sides. And mostly what I did was I pulled clips from their opening statements. Each one had the format was each one got 15 minutes for opening statements, then a 5-minute rebuttal to each other, and then they went into the Q&A portion of the show. And that comprised of Gene, the moderator. He had his questions, and then they were able to ask questions of each other, I think, and then they were able to take questions from the audience. I actually excluded any of the Q&A, primarily because when it comes to Q&A, sometimes the setup for a question can be kind of long, and since I'm doing a response video, it makes the clips longer, and I think it makes it a little bit more clumsy for a podcast. Now you could do it if you were only doing like 1 or 2, but since I'm kinda trying to review like, maybe I don't know if I wanna say the totality of their argument, but in is full I wanna evaluate their commentary, their perspectives in as full manner as possible. And so in order to do that, and not have like a 5-hour show, I just basically pulled from the opening statements and for the most part. So, um, this is I'm going to split this show up between Dave and Alex. So I'm going to start with Dave first. We'll go into intermission. We'll have a little bit of a break, and we'll come back. We'll do Alex, and then what I'll do after that I'm going to do a premium part of the show because as a Rumble creator, that's in the Rumble creator program, I am required to do some premium shows. I have to do like 5 hours of premium this month. So I thought, oh, you know what? That'd be great. I will, in the premium portion of the show, I will address what I think are their weakest arguments, just one clip from each. And then I'll also announce some upcoming guests, who they're going to be. Now, if you're not able to be on premium, that's fine. Like you could sign up right now if you want. You can go and I think my VA lady will be in the chat telling you guys how to sign up for Rumble Premium if you wish. But if you don't, like, it's not like you're gonna miss the world. Okay, I'm just trying to find some perks that I can give people who happen to be premium. So that's what I'm gonna do. Now, if you're not gonna be premium, you'll still be able to watch my guest. So I'll have a guest on tonight at 6:30. So you look forward to that. And then I will have a guest on, a dad on tomorrow. I'm sorry, is it tomorrow morning? What day is this? I'm losing my track of my days. Yes, today is Thursday. For some reason, I thought it was Wednesday. And then I'll have a dad on tomorrow morning at 7:30. So look forward to that. So one way or another, you'll get to watch them. You might miss out on a little bit of my commentary. So let's get into it. Let's not waste any more time. So I'm going to start with Dave again. So we're just going to play some of these video clips, and we're going to go right on down the line. Now, I want to point out that that I'm going to play these basically in chronological order. So if you watch the whole debate, which is in the show notes, you can link to it. I've linked to it, and you can go watch the whole debate. They are in chronological order, so I'm not going to mismatch them in any direction. And I tried to make sure that each clip was concise but complete. I want to make sure we're not taking anybody out of context. Now, I will say this. I am adding commentary, not necessarily going to try to criticize one and then elevate the other. But I will admit that I am more partial to Alex's position on this. Is a rule of thumb when it comes to Dave, I tend to agree with his positions. Where we generally disagree is strategy. That's generally our disagreement. However, in this particular case, I actually disagree with Dave's position altogether, and I am more partial to Alex's position. Although there are some elements of it that I'm not particularly fond of, but that's okay. My relationship with both of them is such that I know Dave personally. I consider him to be a friend. We're not like super buddies. He doesn't have my phone number necessarily. We don't call each other and all that. But I actually at least know Dave. I have never met Alex. I don't know a whole lot about Alex. So in that particular sense, I'm less familiar with his work than I am with Dave's. Okay, now let's get into this and let's see what Dave has to say.
And I think this is an issue that maybe the one thing me and Alex would agree on is that it's an issue that's really important that libertarians get right.
Okay, so that was one of the very beginning statements that he made, and I agree wholeheartedly. I think when it comes to immigration, we absolutely, this is one of those things where it is so important that we should spend more time debating and discussing this. Now, how we debate it, hopefully by the end of the show, you will understand some key areas where I think libertarians in general can improve in this conversation, and maybe get us to a position that's more that's more acceptable to a broader audience. Like right now, I think there's a big division. I don't think it necessarily has to be. So, and maybe it will always be that way because we are libertarians. Anyway, so I agree with him there. I think that's good. Let's get into his second video clip here. This is where I start to disagree with Dave, and it actually kind of surprised me. I was a little, maybe I've not been paying as much attention to him, and listening to his podcast when I can. But this one actually kind of surprised me, for which I disagree. So let's listen.
Really, the foundational principle of libertarianism is all orbits around voluntarism, voluntary exchanges. Now, people will start at different starting points, but basically that's what it is to be a libertarian, is to believe in even things like property rights, the non-aggression principle. All of them are essentially built around the idea that we prefer voluntary exchange and we reject coercion or aggression. And there are different types of libertarians who are libertarians for different reasons, some more radical than others, but that kind of is the centerpiece of what you're arguing for. If you're arguing for a libertarian society, you're arguing for more voluntary exchanges and less coercion. And if that's your starting point, and then your end point is supporting a policy that you would have to support in order to reject this resolution, that would essentially be saying, you are going to drastically change almost every aspect of our society against the will of almost all of the people who live here. I would humbly suggest you've messed up somewhere along the line.
Okay, so he's correct in the chain of logic there. So I don't disagree with that. My first disagreement is that voluntarism, in my opinion, is not the center or what everything orbits around when it comes to libertarianism. It is self-ownership. And I was really kind of taken back. Normally, what I see are people saying, hey, self-ownership or they say property rights. Now, I'm not a big fan of saying property rights because I believe that property rights is an extension of self-ownership. And so if you're looking and you're like, all right, where do property rights come from? Well, they come from the fact that an individual owns their own self. So for me, the very basic starting point for libertarianism is that each person owns their own self. After that, everything either submits or is in violation. And where does voluntarism come in? Well, I think voluntarism, the exchange, the interactions between people that are voluntary, that is a result of self ownership. Because I own myself, I can choose to have an interaction with you or choose not to. And that action can be personal, that can be business, right? That could be violence in a sense, because maybe you and I want to have a fight. Maybe it's a physical fight because we're pissed off at each other, or maybe to make this a little bit easier, it's a fight where we decided to go into a ring. We're going to box it out. We both agree to certain rules. We agree to have a certain amount of time, so on and so forth, right? And so, in that particular sense, we can make this is all voluntarism. This is all an example of what voluntarism is, which is just when people engage with each other, it's on a voluntary basis, no matter what it is. But the starting point for that has to be self ownership. And that once you get to self ownership, there is nowhere else to go. There is no more. You don't say, like, if you're asking like the 5 whys that I've said, like, why this, why that, why. Once you get down to self ownership, I don't believe that there's anything that comes before that. That is the absolute foundation, right? And then for me, I argue everything after that. And then I bring everything back to this point. So, I think I was really kind of I really was taken back because I was like, "Really? Like, that seems kinda weird." Um, and perhaps and I wanna be very careful here because I don't wanna make accusations that I can't back up. Perhaps starting with voluntarism is necessary for him to hold the position that he does. Um, but I think it's incorrect. The second thing that I will point out on that particular clip is that I don't believe that there's a drastic change necessary. Like, it's a very interesting argument, and Dave does this a couple of times throughout the debate. He makes this point of like, "Oh, do you want your whole country changed if all these mass number of people come in?" Well, the resolution again was government restrictions on the immigration of peaceful and healthy people makes sense from a libertarian standpoint, especially in present day America. Okay, it doesn't. There's nothing in the resolution that suggests there's just going to be this mass influx. And I want to point out something. Before the election, the mass influx of immigration was claimed to be coming from the Biden administration. So, like, we're not talking like, hey, like there were all kind of claims and arguments being made. People were speculating about this and that. They were like, look at this group of people. They're all being funded by George Soros or whatever, right? So if you go back and you look politically, the argument wasn't like, hey, all these people just happen to want to come here out of nowhere. It was all these people that are coming in large numbers are coming because the Democrats are trying to they're trying to reform our nation. Now, you can make that argument, and that's fine. But I just want to point out that there isn't, at this present time, there is not a just organic mass immigration from other countries to the United States. It's the same, effectively, the same level that we've always seen, or at least the organic portion of it is, right? Like, there's not, you can't look and say, okay, here's this large number of people and they're coming and the government has nothing to do with it. Like, that's not the argument that has been made. And if I remember correctly, I think Dave has himself made this argument, right? Like, hey, the Biden administration was bringing over a bunch of people. They were, coaxing them. They were and so, like, okay, if that's your position, then we need to address organic immigration. What does organic immigration look like? And does it make sense then to kind of talk about this this presumed drastic change, which I don't think exists. I think you're just getting the regular, normal influx of immigrants. Okay, so there's that. Let's continue on, and I'm going to try to keep my commentary brief because I do have quite a few clips here. So we'll see how well I do at that. All right, so here's this third clip here, and go.
I'm not making an appeal to democracy or an appeal to popularity. I'm making an appeal to voluntarism. My argument is that if the people of a country do not wish to have a large number of immigrants coming in, then it is not a voluntary transaction to force that on them.
Okay, so there we go again. This kind of touches upon what I think is part of the problem, is that we're viewing this argument from the lens of what we're claiming is happening at the behest of government, and then kind of superimposing that upon the idea that, yep, this is the organic nature of immigration. It's not. Okay. So if Dave wants to make that argument, he has to say, okay, even if we stop, like, let's assume for a moment, let's go back to that Biden claim. If the Biden administration was doing that, now we have the Trump administration, and people have claimed that immigration has slowed down. Okay, great. So now we know that this mass influx that he referred to now twice, this mass influx is not organic. So now let's think about it in terms of what should the libertarian position be when it's organic. Now, if he wants to make an argument and say, while the government is participating in this, I would agree. I would absolutely agree and say, like, look, the government doesn't have any business saying we are going to entice or otherwise try to encourage people to come to the United States. That's not the government's job. And if they are doing it, the real answer there is to stop the government from doing that. And presumably, that's what we've done when now that we have Donald Trump in office, right? So I think the argument is an error there, and he needs to rethink that. So let's continue on. And by the way, hopefully none of this, like, I don't have a relationship with Alex, so if I say anything negative toward him, he probably don't care. Hopefully Dave doesn't get too mad at me, but if he does, this was all in good faith. So I'm just saying that. But I don't think I'm saying anything too harsh. And Dave's got pretty thick skin, so I think he's a good dude, and I don't think we're gonna have anything to worry about there. All right, so let's go on to this next clip here. This is my fourth clip for Dave. I have 5 clips for each Alex and Dave that I'm going to kind of walk through. And it was tough because there was like a lot. Like what I would really like to do maybe is just walk through the whole thing, but I don't think I can justify like a 3-hour show to evaluate, an hour and a half debate. So anyway.
I don't think I'm making a pedantic point here. I think this is actually very crucial to the debate. It is impossible to oppose this resolution unless you support unrestricted open borders, period. Like zero restrictions. Because even if you're going to argue, as Alex has in the past and many other of his Cato colleagues, for an Ellis Island style system, you're still supporting an enormous restriction on peaceful and healthy people.
Okay, so I'm going to pause this one here. So I think this is an interesting point. I kind of agree. It really depends on the position of the opposing person. If the position is starting with this idea of free movement, and hey, everybody's got to have free movement. If that's your argument for why we can't limit it, then Dave is correct. Like, at what point, like, how do you justify even limited amount of restrictions? Right? Like, because for me, I look and I say, I'm not starting from the point of freedom of movement. I think freedom of movement extends from self-ownership. I start at self-ownership. However, I'm also not an anarchist, which means by default, I have accepted some level of imposition. So where I disagree with Dave is he's like, well, he's kind of like tossing out this idea of Ellis Island. And I think people like to do that because Ellis Island is actually, in my opinion, the Ellis Island model, I think that's the best position that we can come to. It's not the most perfect, but it is the best one that we can come to that balances the considerations of everybody. But he goes into a little bit more detail, which I think is interesting. So again, I agree with him. If your starting point is, hey, freedom of movement, that's why we can't have closed borders. Okay, well then I think Dave's correct. You're going to have a tough time justifying where you draw that line. And if you draw the line, at like Ellis Island, which tends to be limiting people based on crime, prior criminal behavior or health issues, generally like a disease or something that's communicable that's serious. So maybe not the flu per se, but maybe during COVID they might have said, okay, for immigration, if you have COVID, you cannot come into the country until such time that we've learned more about it, so on and so forth. So I think he's correct there. Like they're going to have a tough time drawing that line. So let's continue on because I've got some thoughts as we go forward here.
Because it's a prior restraint on their freedom of movement. So in other words, if the government were to say outside this venue, they were going to set up an Ellis Island style checkpoint. Okay, and you had to go through this checkpoint in order to continue traveling down the road. And this meant, let's make it real Ellis Island standards. You were going to get a health and psychological evaluation, including being forced to disrobe, having your eyelids checked. If you were older, you were going to be passed on for additional screening. You would be held for at least hours, in many cases days, in extreme cases months and even years, before you were granted the right to continue traveling. Me, Gene, Alex, and every single person in this room would consider this to be an egregious violation of our liberty. We would all say, you're Joseph Stalin if you support that policy.
Okay. I like Dave, but I think he's being a bit absurd there. Like this idea of like, oh, we're going to call that Joseph Stalin if you support that. That seems weird to me because again, I start with the idea of self-ownership, which means I can do whatever I want with this body. So I could go out after the show and have, 10 cigars in a row if I want. And more than likely make myself very sick. I could do that if I could get off the show and I could like drink some alcohol, even though it's like, 8 a.m. I could do that because it's my body. So I have the choice to do that. And when I look at what he's pointing out, when I look at Ellis Island, which we've already done, and it already to some degree worked. I mean, depending on how you define worked, right? It was functional. We were able to limit people, and we did process people more quickly. When I look at that model, people came here willingly, and they were willing to subject themselves to that review. So I don't think I think the idea that it's on the Joseph Stalin level, I think that's absurdity. And so like I like Dave, and I'm trying not to be too mean to him, but I have come to expect a certain level of debate from him. I just don't think that I don't think his argument rises to that level, to the level of past Dave that I've seen. So I think this is one of his weaker debates, in my opinion. Now, by the way, I will point out he did win according to the rules. I'm not going to try to take that away. So I'm not going to be like, oh, he didn't really win. So I want to be very careful. I'm just kind of giving my commentary. And the idea behind my commentary is so that you, the viewer, the listener, when you're weighing these out, like I'm giving you some reasons to maybe consider this idea, but maybe not consider this idea, so on and so forth. But also when you're talking to other people, hopefully some of these pitfalls that I point out are legitimate ones, and then you will not make them yourself. So hopefully we all learn from this. The intent here is to be edifying. So, but I am I was really kind of surprised by the argument because I just don't think it's a strong argument, and I'm used to something a little bit stronger from Dave. So, anyway, now here's an interesting hypothetical that Dave gave. I generally dislike hypotheticals, and the reason is because a lot of people they take them to this absurd place. And and it's like, just because you can conceive of a hypothetical doesn't make it meaningful. I like hypotheticals that I can actually imagine playing out in real life, that I could that I think might actually happen tomorrow. And so, this one I feel like is kind of on the edge. You could make an argument that no, it's a little bit more realistic. You could also make an argument that it's not realistic. So let's listen, and then I'll give you guys my thoughts on this particular hypothetical that he poses to Alex.
But imagine there's a little conflict right now between India and Pakistan. They both have nuclear weapons. Pakistan nukes India. Somehow India is able to get 500 million people who want to immigrate here. They all come, 500 million all come to America. Is it really the libertarian position? And let's say, hypothetically, 100% of the American people don't want them. We don't want this to happen. Is the libertarian position really, sorry, you lose your country? There's nothing you're allowed to do. You will now culturally and racially and religiously, every tradition that you have is gone. You live in a completely different country now. And you know what? You have to take that. And even if very powerful people happen to be funding it because they like that for their agenda, if the libertarian position is that you have to take that, we have all messed up somewhere along the lines. Thank you guys very much.
Okay. So that was the end of his opening. And again, we see that he's kind of drawing this this reality of millions and millions of people are coming here en masse, and it has something to do with some power that be, right? Like, and again, so I think we have to ask ourselves, is this the reality? Well, again, if that was what the Biden administration was doing, and the Trump administration is now stopping it, then it is no longer the reality. So the answer to mass immigration at the behest of somebody or some entity or some group of people that are basically trying to take over the country, which has been the argument that a lot of people on the right have made toward the Democrats, toward Biden. They're like, look, they're trying to come over here. People have made the arguments like, look at all, if you have a mass influx of people, that changes the number of representatives that they get. And basically people have made the argument like that mass immigration is this thing that the Democrats are doing in order to grow their party. And I'm not going to try to dispute or, determine whether or not that's true or not, but that has been the argument that's made. So again, we're back to, is that still the case? If that's the case, then we have a very serious problem if Biden was doing it and now Trump is doing it. So now that we can say, okay, well, now that Trump is in office, we're not getting this mass influx of people. Great. Now we've solved, for the most part, mass immigration problem without worrying about whether or not libertarians have to tell the American people something. Now, I want to go back to something that Dave said a moment ago in a prior video, because I think that is important. And I think he kind of contradicts himself.
I'm not making an appeal to democracy or an appeal to popularity.
Okay. Strictly speaking, it's probably not popularity. And maybe not explicitly democracy itself. But his argument hinges on what the people want. That's literally what he just said. He said, hey, are the American people supposed to just take it? Is that the libertarian position? If it is, you need to reconsider your position. And I agree, in the context of the government doing it, imposing it upon the people. Yes, the libertarians should be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. This is not the government's job. The government's job is not to entice or encourage people to come over here. The government's job, from a libertarian perspective, is solely to protect your rights. That's their role. You could argue that you could argue that the government might have mediation powers to mediate between disputing parties, right? And then I would argue like very minimal services, so like police, fire and rescue, stuff like that, right? And then the military at the federal level. But from my perspective, the government would be extremely tiny. As I like to tell people, if the government is a beach ball right now, I would like it to be the size of a marble. That would be the core of their responsibilities. And one of the responsibilities is firmly not to encourage or try to bring more people over here, especially to grow your party, right? If that's your goal. So, but again, either we've put a stop to it or we haven't. Now, if we haven't put a stop to it, then Dave would be correct. But he has to acknowledge one of two things. Either that is still the case or it's not the case. And so, therefore, this is not the argument that we should be considering. We should not be concerning ourselves. We should now be telling people, like, hey, it has stopped. And from the libertarian perspective, here's where we are with immigration. So, let me put it a different way. He makes his hypothetical, and that's just all I wanted to play there. So, he makes this hypothetical and he says, "All right, so Pakistan and India are at war. One lobs, weapon of mass destruction over at the other. Now you've got some 500 million people here, and they all want to show up to America. Like, is that cool? Okay, if you're talking a mass migration, you can possibly make that argument. Like 500 million. Should we really want 500 million people showing up all at once? That's fine. But again, that's not what's happening. That isn't happening. And not to mention, I think if we're gonna think about things from a logical perspective, 500 million people would probably spread out to different countries in the world. So we're not gonna get all 500 million. And the real question is, okay, does this argument still apply if only 100 million people want to show up? What if it's only 50 million people? What if it's only 25 million people? What if it's only 10 million people? What if it's only 5 million people? Let's talk about it in any one given year, right? So once we start working our way down, and then we can identify and say, what is the current case right now? Well, it's not 500 million people. It's not 100 million people. So what is it? And so once we start whittling our way down to where the problem actually is and what the problem actually is, then I think the libertarian argument of saying, like, Ellis Island makes more sense depending on how we present it to people. Like, you can present it poorly and then it's not going to make any sense. Or you can present it well and point out, look, we've stopped this mass migration that was coming in at the behest of the government. So now we have a different problem to solve: immigration in general. Okay, what is the immigration currently like? Is it really 100 million people? Probably not. Okay, like, I don't know. I'm saying probably because I don't know the specific number. And so then we work our way down and we say, here is where the number really is. And so then I think we can have a better conversation about how the libertarian perspective actually works for America. Now, I'm trying to remember, and maybe I'll try to look it up really quickly here. Let's see what uh, what number of people came through Ellis Island. All right, so let's see here. I believe it was in the millions. Let's see here if I can find a really quick answer. Do. Let's see. Large number. Okay, so that tells me where they came from. That's not telling me the number, but I thought it was like 15 million. Do. Um, I'm looking and I'm trying to find. I think it was. It looks like 12 million. Okay, so during the 40. Okay, so this is from the Library of Congress, so we know we can trust it. During the 40 years it operated, Ellis Island saw more than 12 million immigrants pass through its gates at a rate of up to 5,000 people a day. So you have to ask yourself now, let's, because Dave's always like, hey, tackle my argument. And that's what I'm trying to do here. His argument is, you know, all these millions of people are going to come and they're going to drastically change our country, right, in a way that the citizens here don't want, which is a fair consideration, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with considering that. But if Ellis Island, which was way more open than we are now, had 12 million people come over 40 years, then what's the comparison? What does it look like today? Like, if we instituted Ellis Island right now, would we get 12 million people coming through in the next 40 years? Is that the case? Now, I think it would probably be higher because there's simply more people on the planet and more people might want to come to the United States. On the other hand, you could argue and say that there is now less poverty throughout the world, in some places. And so therefore, people that might have wanted to immigrate from another country no longer need to. right? Or maybe they just want to come here to go to school, but then go back home, so on and so forth. So again, I think the whole argument really breaks down for Dave. That's kind of my perspective, is just like the hypothetical doesn't really work because it relies on holding on to ideas that I believe are supposed to no longer be true. However, if they are true, then that represents a different problem. That is a problem of government, not of one of people coming over here. If the government is trying to encourage and intentionally bring people here, then, like through incentives and all these other things, well, then the government needs to stop that. Libertarians can stand on that particular point in full. So that's where I am. I again, normally I would be cheering for Dave and say, wow, that was a really great point. I felt a little underwhelmed by his arguments in this particular debate, just because I don't think they add up. But I think the biggest problem is that we're not starting with self-ownership, and we're starting with the idea of voluntarism, which, in fairness, opponents often start with freedom of movement. Like that seems to be the centerpiece of their argument, which I think is also a faulty starting point. So we'll take some comments here, and then we will go to intermission, and then where's my looking for things here. So then we'll go to intermission, and then we'll come back and we'll review Alex as well. So let's see here. Good handful of comments in here. So I'm just going to grab them kind of quickly. Let me see here. I don't see any comments over in the chat on X or on Facebook. So let's see here. Let's see here. I'm just grabbing them. I'm not even fully reading them. Kagela says, I can make an argument that a community might be able to exclude me just as a private homeowner can, assuming they own the land like a king, or our government is a king. Yeah, there's a, you could go very in depth into this argument on at what point should a community be able to exclude people. I look at it like this. If you live in a neighborhood that's a very clearly marked neighborhood, like there's clear lines and whatnot, or you can just say like, hey, this circle of houses essentially, and then all the houses within it mark in particular area, and then all the homeowners get together and say, here are the rules that we want to have for this particular neighborhood. I would support that. Where they're all, now we'd have to really work out what happens if along the way somebody says, well, I still live here, but I no longer want to be subject to the rules. Well, they should be able to secede from that. But how does that work? How does it operate? And then what happens once enough people secede? Then perhaps the whole thing breaks down. So it can get really, really in depth, but in general, I would agree with that. Let's see. Junior Coltrane says, Dave, the failed comedian, has a very limited vocabulary. I don't know that I would agree with that. I think Dave is actually a very intelligent person. And it's hard to say somebody is a failed comedian when they're constantly on the road doing comedy shows. That's not really like, unless you're defining failed in some bizarre way, that doesn't make sense. So sorry to burst your bubble on that one. Let's see here. Time surfing alien. I've never heard of this Dave fella. I'm not sure if you're joking or being funny. But a lot of people haven't. I mean, if you're in libertarian circles, chances are you have. But fame can only go so far. Let's see here. To Tommy, the coffee addict. I'm a bit behind. I'm catching up. Dave, although he is saying democracy is not the issue, collective ownership over a presumed collective party is an appeal to democracy. Kind of in a way. Like, it's not directly, it's not like he's saying like, hey, democracy is important and we can't lose democracy over it. He's really kind of hinging his argument on people and what people desire, and should we be overriding people's desire. And again, I would agree with him if we're talking about the government doing all of this intentionally, but I part ways on that argument. The moment that now we're just looking at immigrants on their own deciding, hey, I would like to come to America and, go work over there, build a life, have a family, so on and so forth, then I think that argument really breaks down. So let's see what else we got here. You got Chatty in here. Chatty in the chat. I can say corny stuff like that because I'm an old and I'm a dad. So like, I'm allowed. Let's see what else we got here. Junior Coltrane says this guy is wearing a blue shirt again. That must be his favorite color. Let's see if he wears blue tomorrow too. So actually, it is funny when I put this on. I was like, I'm gonna be the blue shirt guy again. This is a lighter blue than it was yesterday, though. But it is in fact blue, and the reason that I chose it is because it happened to be the one that was sitting to the side that was ironed already, and I didn't have to do anything to it because I was rushing around this morning trying to get a bazillion things done. So I worked on this a bit last night, and then I went to bed, and then I got up really early and worked on the episode some more, and then here I am. So I just grabbed what was available. But yes, it is a blue shirt. I wouldn't go as far as saying it's my favorite shirt. Tomorrow's shirt, you may have noticed, I don't always do such a good job of it, but you may have noticed that at least on Monday and Friday, I generally have the same shirt. So tomorrow I will have my quote unquote dad talk shirt. So look forward to that. All right, folks, let's go to intermission real quick, and then we'll be back and we'll talk about Alex's stuff. So be right back. Hey, Liberty fam, do me a favor. If you enjoy the show, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to my channel. And for the really serious folks out there, I want you to hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. By the way, if you want to support the show, head over to libertydad.locals.com and sign up. For $5, you can be part of this show. There, I'll engage supporters of the show. We'll discuss topics that you want me to talk about, response videos that you would like to see, or anything related to the show. And I'll even have a monthly subscribers only episode. By the way, I'm always looking for dads to join me for Dad Talk. That's my series where I invite everyday dads on to talk about what's important to them in the context of being a dad. No argument, no debate, and dads choose the topic. It's my way of raising dad voices. If you're a dad or you know a dad who has something to say, let's get connected. Episodes air live on Friday mornings or Friday evenings, whichever works best for dads. All right, let's get back to the show. Okay, so we're back, and now we're going to dive into Alex's arguments, the ones that I picked out that I think are interesting, that I have something to say about. Now, again, I just want to reiterate to people, I am more partial to his position, not necessarily all of his arguments, however, than I am of Dave's. However, I do know that I generally tend to agree with Dave, and we generally disagree mostly on how like strategy of implementing some of these ideas. So let's get into it. Let's see. Here we go. Let's see. We've got there you are. There it is. I had to navigate.
I will make 3 points in this debate. 1, libertarian first principles require the free movement of peaceful and healthy people. 2, evidence shows that immigration is beneficial to Americans. And 3, government immigration restrictions are how tyranny will come to the United States.
Okay, so number one, that really strikes me as starting with the freedom of movement. So as I pointed out earlier, I think that's wrongheaded. I don't think that we should, as libertarians, start with this idea of freedom of movement, because what you're basically doing is you're saying, okay, you have self-ownership. Now, what does that include? What are some of the things that we would expect self-ownership to entail? And then you might be able to bubble it up and grab a few broader principles. So for me, I look at it and I say, if you have self-ownership, one of the elements of self-ownership is that you can do what you want with your body. So therefore, I could choose to eat a salad, or I could choose to eat a whole bunch of cookies. Okay. So like that's what I can do because I own this body. I own this body. So I can decide that I want to work a garden in my backyard and, put all the time and labor into it and grow vegetables. And then I can eat all those vegetables just to me. I can sell them to my neighbors. I can give them away to my neighbors, or I can just throw them in the compost, right? Like I could do whatever I want because I own myself. Therefore, I own my labor. I own what comes from myself. And so therefore I can do what I want with that particular property. Same concept when it comes to any other property, because I purchased that property through money that I acquired by engaging in self-ownership. And then on top of all that, I would say, like, I have the freedom to walk across the street. I could go to my neighbor's house. I could go upstairs. I could go downstairs. Like, I have freedom of movement. I can go exercise if I want, right? I can go to the gym, right? Presuming that they allow me to, which then invokes freedom of association. Like if the gym says, okay, we want to associate with DL purely because he's willing to pay us the amount of money, and that's our criteria. Great. If they were to say something, have more strict rules and say, okay, well, you can't be any taller than 6 foot. Well, then great, I fit that, right? And it's absurd, but the point being, like, everything comes from self ownership. I own myself, therefore I own my labor. I own the fruit of my labor, and then after all of that, I can decide, because I own all of that, I can decide whether or not I want to associate with somebody else. And so that's where the freedom of movement comes in. But I don't actually believe that there's any such thing as necessarily freedom of movement per se, right? Like, it's maybe I don't want to say it like that. Maybe I don't want to say I don't believe that, but I think that's like secondary at best. Like, I don't think that would be a primary argument that I would lead with. However, he did. So I'm going to part ways on that. The second point that he makes is that he says immigration is good for American people. That may be the case, but honestly, I don't think that's a good argument to work with. Number one, Dave is actually correct when he says there's a large number of people that have issues with immigration. Now, where I think people make their mistake is that they assume that, oh, you just don't want immigrants here. But I think it's actually more nuanced than that. And that, if depending on how you phrase the question, will depend on the answer that you get. So if I just said, hey, should we have open borders? Most people would be like, no, we should not. But if I were to say, do you care if immigrants come over here, learn the language, work hard, pay their bills, pay their taxes, and don't commit any crimes? Like, most people could be like, well, yeah, they like that, right? And then on the issue of immigration, I will point out that there are a lot of immigrant owned places that are very clearly immigrant owned, and they are representations of that culture. Indian restaurants, Mexican restaurants, so on and so forth, right? Those are some of the more obvious examples. And Americans have no problem using their self ownership expressed as their freedom of movement and their freedom of association to go and be patrons in those places. This, like, this is why I'm not so convinced. Like, I hear about all these polls, like so many millions of Americans support this or oppose this, when it comes to immigration. I tend to be kind of skeptical, because I look and I say, what are the people actually doing? Like, are people so bothered by immigration that they don't even go to, establishments that are owned by immigrants, or establishments that are a representation of that immigration? So, like, some places might be owned by an immigrant, like a car shop, an auto body shop. Okay, well, that's not necessarily a specific expression of their culture. That's just like, hey, here's a service that I'm providing that I'm good at. But then some of them are a representation of the culture, such as an Indian restaurant or a Mexican restaurant, right? Like, those would be, they may not be a one-to-one example, but an immigrant might own it and be, using and saying, hey, you like tacos? We got Taco Tuesday, right? You like lamb biryani, which I do. All right, great. Come and get some lamb biryani for dinner, for lunch, right? That would be the Indian restaurant, if you're not familiar with it. So I think in this particular case, um, I think we have to be very careful about what it is that Americans actually do, and separate that from anything else, including the idea that, hey, immigrants make this country better. I I just don't think that's a strong argument. I think it would be a good argument to say, hey, they're not harming it, and if that comes up, to be armed with that information. But I don't know that I would lead with that as a means to communicate with people, because I think they're already doing it and you don't have to. And I think you're better off focusing on, okay, what do people already do? Why do you go to the Mexican restaurant? You know that there's immigrants there, right? Aren't those the kind of immigrants that you like? Yeah. Wouldn't you like more immigrants like that? Yes, probably. Like, wouldn't you like a good, Ethiopian restaurant, or, Indonesian restaurant, or whatever? Like, wouldn't you like to try that out and then go there and support somebody who is here living? Maybe they speak multiple languages, but they're, again, paying their taxes. They're doing this and that. I think that would be a stronger element of that argument, or a stronger direction for that argument, rather than trying to say, oh, people people are actually a net good. Okay, just focus on what people are actually doing. And then his third point, I actually do agree with that, and we'll get into it in just a moment, where he's basically like, hey, you know what did I'm drawing a blank on what he said. Oh yeah, that the immigration law leads to tyranny. And so we'll discuss that here in just a moment. So I think that's a good point. So not a big fan of his first one. The second one I think needs to be revised. The third one's good. Let's go on to this next clip here. And I know I'm going kind of fast, but I'm trying not to belabor the point, and I'm trying not to have like, a 40-hour episode. So here's his second video clip. Maybe. What happened? Let's try it again. Where's the audio? Like it's showing. Did we? That's interesting. Let me try this.
I will make 3 points in this debate.
Okay, so that one worked. Why is this one not working? I don't know why this one is not working. We may have to skip it. So, or I'll just have to tell you about it. I don't know why. I thought everything was working here. Is this one? Oh no. Stop. What's going on here? That's oh, I know what's going on. I know what's going on. Give me just a second. I can fix it. I can fix her. I got it. I know what's going on. So let me pause this really quickly here. I know what's going on. There we go. Okay, so now it's going to work.
In this debate. 1, libertarian first principles require the free movement of peaceful and healthy people. 2, evidence shows that immigration is beneficial to Americans. And 3, government immigration restrictions are how tyranny will come to the United States. We're talking about government laws and regulations that prevent you, all of you, from using your property as you see fit and from voluntarily interacting with others. Every immigration restriction infringes both on the rights of the immigrants and on your rights to associate with them.
Okay, so I think this is a perfect example of what I was just talking about, where I was like, look, I think rather than say, oh man, look at all these positive things that immigrants do, because I think that's very similar to the, we need diversity because diversity makes the company better, right? And it's like people don't believe that because they're like, yeah, I work in a shop of all white guys and we do just a fine job. Like we're not suffering. We're making, we make good stuff. Like, so I don't think this, to me, this is very similar to that argument. It's saying like, you need this because it will be good, which the kind of like the underlying assumption is if you don't have this, then things won't be good or you're not getting the best. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think the best comes from when things are organic. So if you organically have a company that is full of white people, then you can have a really great company. If you organically have a company that's full of different races and maybe genders, like male, female, gender, stuff like that, you've got this mix of people and they can be a great company. And the underlying principle for both of them is that it was done organically. People were looking for what fits best for my organization, what fits best for me and what we're trying to accomplish, right? And maybe it is that you want some Black voices and some Mexican voices and so on and so forth. Maybe it is that you're like, I would like those, but that's not an option, so I'm just going to hire the white guys, right? Or maybe you're just like, look, I like white people, so I'm going to hire white people. Like there are, like, and I know people get uncomfortable saying that, but nobody's uncomfortable saying, hey, I like Black-owned businesses that hire Black people. Like nobody's ashamed to say that. And you shouldn't be, because again, if it's organic and then you're looking out for your own interest and your interest, like either it works or it doesn't. And if it doesn't work because you made bad decisions, well, that's too bad. So I think this is a superior argument to go with and to say like, look, if you owned a restaurant and you wanted to hire only Americans, should you be allowed? Yes. Okay. What if you wanted to hire somebody who was not an American, somebody that came over here? Let's take off illegal immigrant off the table. Let's say that you want to hire an immigrant because maybe something in your life has given you a heart for immigrants. And so you're like, look, I want to give immigrants a shot. Maybe you were moved by the story of your grandfather coming over here through Ellis Island And when he came over, he had $20 in his pocket. And then he found a bakery that he could work at. And then he slept in the back. And he worked really, really hard for like a decade. And he saved up all his money. And then he was able to buy his own shop. And then he married. And then he had, your parents. And then your parents eventually, well, not your parents, but your mom or your dad. And then they eventually went on to find love and then create you, right? And you're moved by that story. And you're like, I would love to help immigrants come over here and have an easier time making their way. I think it's great that my grandfather was able to come over here with $20 and he was willing to sleep on the floor, but I don't think we have to have that anymore. I would like to have a business where I help people out and they don't have to sleep on the floor. Maybe that's you. To me, that is the core of American principles, is that people can decide how they want to utilize their own resources. And by doing that, that's the maximum amount of freedom that we can get, right? Like you can't find a system where people get more freedom than that. The freedom to say, I don't want to hire any immigrants. I want to hire immigrants, whichever the case may be. I want to hire a mix of them both. Or maybe some people might just say like, look, whoever happens to be the first person that gets here that's qualified for the job, that's who I'm hiring. If they happen to be an immigrant, so be it. If they happen to be a US citizen, also so be it. I think that is the best position. So I think that's what needs to be focused on. This is a longer clip. I may not go through the whole thing.
Libertarians care about first principles, but we also care about the consequences. We begin with a presumption of liberty, which can be overcome if immigration causes serious harm.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I meant to cut it down at this particular part. So this is where I take a huge issue with Alex, because he's like, this is my first principle, but we can overcome it if it causes problems. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, hold up. No, either it is a principle or it is not, right? And I don't think you can overcome it. Now, you might say there are circumstances where we have to make different decisions, right? There are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. So you might say, okay, well, here is my principle, but what I want to see is, how does that principle hold itself when things look grim? Because at the end of the day, it's not really a principle if in adversity you just simply ignore it. Like it's not really then your more basic principle is, my principles are based on what is working out and what is comfortable. No, a principle is something that you hold on to, and it shows itself, it shines most in the moment when it matters, when things are getting turbulent. That's when the principles matter the most. And so I think he's dead wrong on here. And I look at it and I say, when you start with this is why I say you should not start with, and he does, his first principle is this freedom of movement. Well, when you start with what I think is an expression of the principle of self-ownership, when you start there, then I think, yes, you can equally start finding ways where you can ignore it. And he seems to do this very quickly. He's like, oh, well, as long as everything's hunky-dory, then great, we can adhere to this principle. But the moment it starts getting turbulent out there, the moment we don't like it, then we can just discard it. No, that's absolutely, that is incorrect. And I reject that completely. So let me put this into context, how it would actually work. If you're talking about self-ownership and you say people can decide to come and move here, okay, great. So they can come and move here. Now, what happens if all of a sudden 100 million people are trying to come over here because some administration is saying, hey, we're going to welcome you over here. Why don't you guys come over here? Okay, full stop. Now we're in a different situation. Now we have to deal with the government first. Government, you aren't supposed to be trying to encourage people to come over here necessarily. Your job is to protect rights. Your job is not to increase the population. Your job is not to worry about, are we getting enough people coming over here or are we not? Okay. That is not your role. Your role is to protect rights. That's it. Okay. Maybe negotiate, between quarreling parties, but otherwise that's the extent of your responsibility and your role. And so if we put a halt on that, we are putting a halt on what government is doing. And then we go back to, okay, now let's go to irregular immigration. Okay, now let's go back to what is actually happening on the ground. And then there we can still safely rely on self-ownership. So at no point did I overcome self-ownership. So I think this is a huge weakness in Alex's argument, and he needs to really reconsider it. He also goes on, and it might have been in that clip, but I'm not going to get into it. He goes on and he lays out this argument of, okay, and it's a very long spiel, so I didn't include it, but he lays out this argument saying, okay, well, look at this, the data. It says that immigrants use welfare less, their fewer crimes are committed, and then Dave disputed that. In my opinion, if information is contested, sharply contested, that should not be the basis of your argument. It may be supplemental to your argument, but it shouldn't be the basis. And it seems like he's made it the basis of his argument, as we'll see here in a moment. So I think we have to be careful. So if you're a libertarian and you are supporting Ellis Island or even open borders, I would encourage you to not try and use, okay, well, immigrants come over here and commit fewer crimes, not because I don't believe it, okay, but because for every person that has charts and graphs and data that would agree to that, there is somebody out there that has charts and graphs and data that does not agree with that, right? And so now you're basically in the middle of this debate that is not yet settled. So I prefer, when I'm trying to convince somebody of my position, to use elements that aren't really all that disputed. In fact, I would normally, like if I was debating Dave, I would try to use facts and figures that Dave would agree with, not things that he would say, I think you're wrong on that, or I think you're not looking at the data correctly, or I think there's nuance. Like if we get to that point, then I think now I don't have such a strong argument, because now I have to do two things. I have to not only dispute what my opponent is criticizing of my position, but then I still have the burden of trying to convince you that this is that this part of my argument should lead you to a new place, right? So I think when you do that, you open up the door to having to basically argue two different points. You start with one point, but then it very quickly splits into two different points for which you have to argue. You have to argue that your opponent's criticism is wrong, and you have to still argue that your position, that your point that you're making is legitimate and should lead somebody to a conclusion. So I think we have to be careful. All right, let's move on to the next one here. Let's see here where we got. We are the way I number 3. There we go. So I think this is the one that we want. So let's, and the sound may be off on this. So let me pause this real quick. I know what I did wrong. I just didn't click. I added some video clips to this in OBS, and it you have to do some things to make sure the sound comes through. So here we go.
Shows that immigrants pay.
Hold on.
Empirical economic research shows that immigrants pay more in taxes than they consume in benefits, or at worst, break even. That includes costs like government schools, welfare, and criminal justice, which they all use less than native-born Americans. They are less likely to be arrested, convicted of crimes, and incarcerated. Historically, more open immigration is associated with slower growth in the size of the federal government. At the state level, more immigration is either not related to changes in economic freedom or positively correlated.
Okay, so I kind of jumped the gun there on that. That's kind of a snippet of where he's going in, and he's talking. He's like, look, here's all this data that says, immigration is actually a good thing. So again, that tends to be contested. And so then I would argue and say, that's not where you want to go with it. Now, if he does make this argument and say, we've gotten larger government and more tyrannical government during times of increased government oversight in immigration. And I think, like, I don't know if that's the case. And I think I got a clip for that. So I'll just be quiet and we'll go to the next clip rather than using up all the clips here before I even play them. So here, let's go to this next clip. And again, I have to play it and pause it real quick.
Empirical economic research shows that immigrants pay more in taxes than they consume in benefits, or...
Hold on. We got the wrong one. So let's see here. Pause this for a second. And let's see. Stop this. So we will give me just a second. Let me click this little button and get the audio corrected here. So there we go. Okay. So
the libertarian response is to abolish the welfare state not to expand government control over the borders.
Okay, so now he's kind of addressing this issue that a lot of people make. They say, hey, look, a lot of people will say, I am actually open borders, but for right now, I have to be closed borders because we have this welfare state that's blown up and people are using it. I think that those are two entirely separate issues, and that you cannot close off one with the hope that you will then be able to address the other. I think you have to simply address each one individually, particularly in government. Now, I know government ties things in together, and that makes it extremely difficult. But I tend to believe that it's going to be that it's very wishful thinking, because what ends up happening is if you stop, like if you like, there aren't a lot of people that are complaining and angry about the welfare state, not to the degree that you see it necessarily with immigration. So what I think what the job of libertarians needs to be is to put out information that gets people as upset over welfare and the abuse of it as they do with immigration and the abuse of that. And then I think we need to make sure that we help people come to the point where they realize, yes, I actually do appreciate immigrants. And if you believe in welfare, yes, then I appreciate the welfare program, in a state where it's not abusive. But I think most everybody would agree the abuses in both of them. That's a common ground that we can find. So I agree. All right, let's continue.
The problem is the government services, not the immigrants. Social Security's problem isn't the elderly, it's the government program itself. The problem with public schools isn't the children, it's the government schools. The problem with immigrant welfare use is the welfare state, not the immigrants. The far less extreme way to deal with this, rather than building a wall around the country, we should build a higher wall around the welfare state.
Okay. That may be, in my opinion, the best comment that Alex made. And it really caught me by surprise, because I was like, oh, that's a really good point. So in the process of pointing out and saying, like, look, in the government school issue, the issue is schools, right? It's the administration, it's the processes, it's the bureaucracy, right? You can even make an argument that in some ways it's the teachers, as a result of the bureaucracy, that if we had less bureaucracy, we could have better teachers, right? But it is not the students. It's not the people that are utilizing that particular service necessarily, right? There are students for which, yes, they do need to be removed. They are the ones that would be abusing that system, right? In the same way, immigration is similar, right? Most immigrants are here working, doing exactly what Americans want them to do, right? Like, other than how you got here, after that point, most of them are going to work, paying their taxes where applicable, right? Like if you're illegal, you're not paying income taxes, but you're paying taxes for when you buy stuff. But if you are legal, then you're paying both, and you have a job, then yes, you are now paying your income taxes and other taxes, for which most Americans would say, yep, that's what you're supposed to do. Taxation is theft. Another conversation for another day. But point being, look and say, yeah, if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing in this context, whether you're an immigrant or a student, then yes, that's what we want. Now, if you're abusing it, no, we don't want that. And if there is a problem, then the problem exists with either the school itself, or the administration, or the bureaucracy, or the immigration system. And that's what we need to address. But then he goes on and he makes this really fabulous point, which I really like. He said, if you're talking about building a wall, this is one of them points where it makes for a good quip, but it also makes for a good, like, you could actually expand upon it and have a full-on conversation. So it's not just a simple, clever bumper sticker saying that once you look into it, doesn't make any sense, right? It actually makes sense. Okay, when you have a problem and you think about a wall, whether it be physical or, figurative or literal, which one's easier to build? Well, it's easier to build a wall and say, hey, these services are off limits in this particular case, and we should. That's what we had Doge out there doing, right? And that's, we can have that conversation later, whether or not it was effective, but that's how you do it. But if you just build a wall, people will climb over it, right? Or they'll dig underneath of it, or they'll find some way around it, because that's what people do. And they'll do the same thing with the bureaucracy as well. They'll find some way to game the system. However, I think when you're looking at them, I think you could make the argument that one is easier and it's less restrictive on everybody. Because if you're putting up a big, huge wall and you're saying this is this one point that you have to go through, well, everybody, in order to leave effectively, if they want to leave on foot, they also have to go through that, right? So if I'm in Texas, and let's just say the border on Texas doesn't have an opening, that the opening is in California, well, then I have to travel to California to get through, right? Or if I'm on one part of the border and I would like to just cross on over really quickly, because maybe that's where my land butts up to the border, right? But if there's a wall there, then I can't just cross over and maybe see the neighbor, if you will, in another country, right? I might have to go through, so you're infringing upon my freedom as an American. And then most importantly, that was kind of a more trivial example. More importantly, I want to associate with who I want to associate with. Maybe I want to get married to an immigrant, right? Which I, in fact, did, not because they were an immigrant, just it happenstance. But maybe that's what I want. Maybe I'm a guy out there and I'm like, you know what? I would really like to date and marry a woman from Colombia or wherever, right? Well, you should be able to do that, and the government shouldn't create barriers to you being able to do that. And that's what he's kind of arguing. He's like, look, if you create these barriers, yes, they may impact illegal immigration, but they all also impact legal citizens and their right to engage in self-ownership and express it in the way that they want. So, all right, let's see what's my next clip here. I think this is my last one. Yes, this should be my last one. So my last clip for Alex, then we'll go check out comments and whatnot. So So let me pause this real quick. I gotta adjust the audio on this. Real quick setting there. Boop, bada bing, and we're done.
Are the health of the state.
All right, home back up.
Immigration restrictions are the health of the state and a declaration of war on our freedoms. They are also some of the most economically devastating, complex, and Soviet-style laws in the United States.
Okay, so Dave and Alex have done this, and like I get it, but this whole like Stalin, communist, socialist, I libertarians, please give up those words. Like they might appeal, they might sound good to people that agree with you. They might catch people's attention, but honestly, I think we're quite exaggerating in most cases when we utilize them. And these words are not being used, colloquially, in a manner that respects the definitions. So I think we should just avoid it and just say, hey, look, this is a good thing. Here's the plain, USA Today language. Here is the plain language under which, this is either a good idea or a bad idea. Let's continue.
You may have noticed there's a piece of paper on your chairs, a very highly simplified map of the legal immigration system. And it is simplified, and it's only part of it. But the point to understand about immigration law is it is the exact opposite of every other portion of American law.
Okay. This is where I think, like, I like his talking about government problems. I think that's a very strong point. And I think I might have said it is his best argument, but this is actually what I think is his best argument, because I was not aware of this. And because he's a very intelligent guy, and a lot of people, say, hey, I respect your knowledge and, the work that you've done. I'm going to go ahead and make an assumption that is true. I have not looked into this, but I think this is a very interesting argument. And I think this would be the better argument for people who oppose immigration restrictions to focus on.
And our Anglo-Saxon system of jurisprudence. Every other portion of law, it says specifically what is not allowed, but everything else is fine. There's no law that says Dave and I can shake hands, right? But there's a law that says he can't punch me in the face. Okay, that makes sense. Immigration law is the opposite. It says all immigration is illegal except what the government specifically allows. If you fit into a narrow Soviet-style category, then maybe if you apply and wait 20, 30, 50 years, yeah, you can get in. Otherwise, there is no way for you to come in. It is.
Okay, so I think this is a really great argument. Again, assuming that it's true. Because what he's basically saying is like, hey, if we're talking about freedom and we're talking about liberty, the way that the Constitution and our government was set up was to maximize that. Now, our libertarians could argue and say whether or not it ended up being good or whether or not it was good in the first place. but we're going to go with, we are, like, as Dave kind of pointed out, like, what are we telling the world around us? And I think we need to meet people where they are. Most people believe that, hey, the Constitution is a good thing. It set up a good system of government with good checks and balances. It is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it was designed in such a way that we could move forward. And as we learn new things and as the situation changes, we could adapt to it, but still maintain this foundation of freedom. So I think in that sense, there is a certain level of correctness with that. I believe it myself. And I think that if you say, like, look, the foundation of our law is to, and you've heard this said before, like, if the government doesn't forbid it, then it's permitted. Like, the government has to forbid it explicitly, unless or the default is that you can do it. This is why when you see new legislation, they're always trying to stop somebody from doing something. They're like, oh, we can't let people do this. And then it's a question of, like, is that really happening at a scale that needs to be addressed? Is it, is legislation the best way to resolve that? So on and so forth. So I think that, it is correct to say the basis of our law is that you have the freedom to do things unless it's explicitly forbidden. But if immigration law, which from my understanding, it makes sense, and I think I agree with him. If immigration law actually starts with, okay, you can only do this, um, this is what you can do, as opposed to this is off limits. You can do anything that we don't know about or haven't said explicitly. If it's the exact opposite, then I think the whole of our immigration laws are a problem, and we probably need to start really reconsidering them and saying, okay, what have we done? How do we get to where our immigration system not only mirrors our regular legal system, the rest of the legal system, but then also produces results that we would like? And the results, again, is what kind of society do you want? And I go back to this idea that regardless of what polls say on immigration, I think what people actually do in their real lives tells us more. And what it tells us is that people generally like immigrants. They generally have no issue with them. They have an issue with maybe illegal immigrants, and that's because I believe they're conflating um, negative things about illegal immigrants with the things that are just normal stuff that comes from, like, if you come over here and you don't speak English so well, that's not so much of a problem until I have to pay for it, right? So that's an issue of, as Alex said, the government problem that we have to address. Build a wall and say, hey, no, you can't have, like, I think it would be totally acceptable to say, we're gonna we're gonna have some sort of safety net for people, but we have a very high barrier for people getting it, right? I think that would be, not from the federal level, of course. Federal level, that is not appropriate, period, ever, whatsoever. But if you want to say at a state level or at a local level, we're going to create this system. We're going to take some of this tax money and we're going to set it aside for people that are a little bit down on their luck. However, here's the barrier for it. One of the barriers could simply be, hey, you have to speak English, right? Like, that can be a barrier. And if you don't speak English, then no, you don't get access to this. You have to have resided in the country for so long, or you don't get access to this. You have to demonstrate that in addition to those two things, you have held a job and you've contributed to this society for a certain amount of time. Otherwise, you don't get access to this. Basically, Social Security, the way it's supposed to work, right? But again, I don't think it should be at the federal level, because you get way too much fraud and abuse and waste. And I think you would get far less of that if it were contained at the state, or better, the local level. So that's my general thoughts on Alex and Dave. I hope you found those interesting. Some final thoughts here, real quick, before we go to the comments, and then we'll jump over into premium mode. Dave speaks better, I think, to people, like, in general. But I found in this particular case, his argument usurps the proper foundation, which is, again, self-ownership. Alex seems to have a command on the data. If you watch the debate, he goes into a lot of specific data, examples, talks about statistics and stuff like that. But some of that data is arguable, and I don't think it's best to be used. I think he speaks better to those who might be thinking in more academic terms, so not the American public. I didn't really see a whole lot out of his argument. The small portions that I thought would be good for me to use if I was talking to my neighbor were very few. Whereas I think Dave, most of his argument I could use with my fellow neighbor, and they would like the Trump supporters would likely agree, right? And they would say, yeah, that makes sense to me, because I think that Dave is speaking more to them, whereas Alex seems to be speaking more to academics. And I don't mean that like as a negative. I'm just saying, like, it's my observation. I think libertarians would be wise to work hard to blend the two styles when speaking to friends and family about immigration and considering your own points, right? Your own views. I think that's going to be your best takeaway from this debate. And it's fine. Like they have positions, and I agree with some of both of them, and that's cool. But I think if we want to edify ourselves and get something out of it, we look and say, okay, what's his style? What's his style? How can I blend and get the best of both worlds? Because I think there's a value add in having a command, a mastery of the data and being able to spit it out, like super quick. But I also think there's a value add in being able to speak to your everyday average person on normal people terms. And so this is one of the reasons why people like Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell were considered so great, because they had a command, they have a mastery of the data. But then when they talk to regular, everyday average people like me that have barely been to college, I can understand complex issues because of the way they broke it down. So I think Dave is correct at the very beginning when he said, this is an issue that libertarians need to get right. I think they need to get it right on two fronts. One, the argument, and then two, how the delivery. And I think that's our takeaway and what we can learn. So let's go over to the chat. Let's check out what y'all are saying over there. And then after that, we're going to go into premium mode. So let's just see what you guys are saying a lot here. So I'm going to miss a lot. I apologize. And I have to try to read at the same time. Let's see. This guy has that dry mouth speech impediment. He must be nervous. I'm not sure if you're talking about me or you're talking about Alex. But I do have dry mouth at the moment. Yes, a little bit. And that's just because after I talk a lot, that tends to happen. So, and my wife will tell you that despite any of that, I don't stop talking, as you obviously can tell. Let's see. Time surfing alien says, I have a fence around my yard. I did not put it up to keep people out. I put it up to keep my animals in. That's fair. And I think that we have to be careful that if we put up walls around our borders, whether it's the state border, a city border, or a national border, that in as much as they can keep people out, they can also keep people in, or at least impose some similar restrictions, some similar limitations. So I think we need to be careful with that. Okay. So he's talking about Lispy Alex, I think. Perhaps, I mean, everybody, whatever it is. I don't think that my voice is all that impressive, so I'm not going to criticize somebody else's. Let's see here. Let's see here. Let's see here. Time Surfing Alien says, I believe we should have secure borders, but I'm definitely not an advocate for a wall. I'm okay with the border, and I'm okay with limitations. I believe in something similar to an Ellis Island style, where what we end up doing is we say, if we can find evidence that you've committed a violent crime, you cannot come in. If you, and that's I'm going to go right now with permanently. And I mean violent crime. I don't mean like you shoplifted from the local store. I mean like a violent crime, like you kidnap somebody, you harm somebody, you beat the snot out of somebody. We don't want you. Like, that's the consequences. If you have major significant health issue that is contagious, and that is a serious problem. So if it's like a simple flu, I'm not worried about that. If it's COVID and it's COVID times, right? Like, it's early on, most people don't have a lot of knowledge about COVID. We're basically arguing about what the data may or may not say. We haven't quite come to settle on that. Then I think that would be a time to say, okay, for the time being, we're going to limit it, but not after that. Like, once you're cleared up, we're good to go. So that's where I stand on that. Let's see what else we got in here. This is funny. I'm a product of the Department of Education, so naturally I forgot this is time surfing alien and part of a conversation. That happens to me as well. I just like to blame it on old age, but I guess now I have to say, like, when I forget something, I have to say, well, I don't know if it's, because I went to the, you know, public schools growing up, or it's because I'm old. Maybe it's a combination of both. So perhaps had I stayed young and went to private schools, I would have been all right. Let's see here. Yes, Social Security, biggest scam ever perpetrated by the American public. Yes, and I believe a lot of that is because it's at the federal level. Also, I think that the government has no business worrying about your long-term benefit. Like, you're going to have money to live on. That's not their job. It would be one thing to make an argument and say, okay, should they have a Social Security style system for people that are down on their luck? And that'd be one argument you could have if it's withdrawn from the federal level and at the state level, or better yet, at a local level of some sort, like maybe a county level. I think that you can have an argument there, and then have a very high barrier for being able to participate in that. And I think if you did it that way, you would actually, there's always going to be some sort of fraud and abuse and waste of some sort. You can always be able to find that. But I think you'll cut down on it tremendously by pulling it out of the federal government, for a variety of reasons I'm not going to try to get into right just yet. Let's see. I think that's it. I think that's all I've got here. Let's see here. Oh, cool. Junior Coltrane says, I want a wall, I want a gate, I want doors, I want locks on my doors. Isn't that the kind of obvious? Because there's crime everywhere these days and I don't want to be a victim. Duh. Yes. And I have all of that on my home, and that protects me from potential criminals outside. But I don't need the government to put all that in place, because then that would apply to me as well. All those limitations become limitations upon me. I don't want those. That limits my freedom. That's a problem. So, all right, folks, we're going to switch this over to the premium, and then hope to see you there. So let me switch that over. And if you're able to be in the premium, then see you in a minute.